Because if you don't write your story, in today's technological day and age, someone will write it for you.
We are here live with Codi Shewan. It is so great to have you on, buddy, and I know we cannot wait to see you in person at the Peak.
It is my pleasure to introduce Codi Shewan.
Really staying in touch with how I want to show up in the world, what ultimately I want my legacy to be when it is left. There's something about being in a room with people you don't know that enables conversations you probably have never had. When we fill our cup first, we are of better service in this world. I really believe that we have to be selfful. And selfful is a made-up word that I made up, and I use it all the time. And it's the idea that's the third piece that I think gets missed way too often. Yeah, ego and control they're real bastards to deal with. It's almost the fine line between observation and obsession. Without question, success is happiness. There's one thing that I have never seen in all my years of being around funeral homes, and that is like a U-Haul attached to a funeral coach. We're not taking it with us. Stuff is just stuff. What goes with us is our thinking about that now it steers me to think about it today, every single day. And that's a shame, because that road can provide a really valuable lesson in and of it's incredibly uncomfortable and incredibly necessary. One of those necessary conversations you have to have with yourself is to understand it provides so much context for how rich an experience can be when it does eventually go well.
I'm Matt Mack, and this is Bloody Mavericks. Today on the show we've got a friend and really special person that I really relate to with the stories, different experiences, and we're gonna dive in deeply into different subjects, starting with his book, his work, his heritage, all together. Hi, Varden Hadudi. That's supposed to be Dutch. Codi Shewan.
You got it. Matt, it's good to see you.
It's been
a while.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Like probably 3 years, I think?
I think probably longer than that. Yeah, probably right? 4 and more. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And thanks for whatever that meant in Dutch, because
it's basically should be, hi, how are you? So just a regular, regular opening, just in the language of your heritage, right? So
That's right.
So Codi, we're gonna dive into your heritage, but let's dive in because we've got the food, which is quite warm, so not make it too cold, because obviously Dutch food is a special type of food, and it's harder to get in Toronto. I haven't got any luck so far, and you're a second person who has a Dutch background. We've got fries.
You got fries. I mean, that's about as Dutch as you can get.
Yeah,
the only thing missing is probably like massive amounts of mayonnaise.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would make them really Dutch, but
makes sense.
I mean, whatever this is, it smells amazing.
Go for it. I will tell you what it is. Be my guest, please. So basically what we have is the English version of your heritage.
Yes.
So it's liver and steak pie. The only thing is, pie is separate. So you should join them together, putting the pie on top of it, and just...
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I can't say I love liver, but stews like this were totally a staple growing up, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, my grandmother, who was British, this was a common smell at her house. So this is great. I can see, there's carrots in here, there's celery.
Yeah.
Whoever put the liver in here should probably be fired. It smells amazing. You're going to join me, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Right. Well, I'm going to use my hands a little bit on the fries.
For sure.
Beautiful. All right. And then we've got some sort of like sauerkraut or something here.
It's a English version of it, I guess. I would assume so.
Looks amazing. English food gets a bad rap, but it really shouldn't. It's savory. I always think, British food feels like home. It feels like comfort, which is probably why I love it to this day, right? It makes you think nostalgically about your family and recipes and those sort of things. So
makes sense.
You're kind of taking me way back right now.
That was the idea.
Well, you've succeeded, my friend. You have succeeded.
Awesome. Tell me what you think.
Well, I'm gonna puncture that with my fork and hope that this is beef and not liver. I'll try not.
Is it as bad with liver for you, or is it just wrong memories of a childhood?
It's probably that. To be honest. Sometimes those things sort of scar us and cause us not to venture too much. No question. Liver was one of those things for me, so I can't say I've actually tried it very frequently in my adult life.
I get you.
Whether you made it or bought it doesn't really matter. The stew's amazing.
Awesome. Good to hear.
Really, really good.
That's great. So you said that it was something that was part of your childhood so tell me a little bit more about how your heritage is divided, which part of the family is Dutch, which part of is English, and obviously you're Canadian, so that's a third one to the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. So my dad was born in Apeldoorn in Holland, and shortly after, it was during wartime, right? So my grandfather was actually part of the Dutch military police.
Oh.
It was a pretty rough go for my grandparents, for sure, during wartime. And then once they, had my dad, they decided to immigrate to Canada. And then they later had another son, not that long after arriving. So really, that side of the family is really, really small. It's just two sons who each only had one son each. So that side is, my dad passed away several years ago. My grandmother passed away as well. So there's really only three of us left on that side. And then on my mom's side, that's the sort of Canadian with the ancestry of Scottish sort of in the, in the past, but it goes back past grandparents at that point. So the closest connection, certainly from a heritage perspective, is that Dutch-British connection.
Okay. And how does it look like for you in terms of, childhood stories or type of upbringing?
Yeah, it really doesn't a lot. I would say that the Dutch influence, more predominantly, there's a reason that the Dutch influence continues to, or rather not influence, but the presence of the Dutch heritage is so relevant in my life now. And it's actually because my dad passed away very suddenly many, many years ago. And the Netherlands have almost like a citizenship inheritance law that if a parent passes away and you're under a certain age, you can inherit the citizenship. So I'm really, really lucky. I have both a Canadian passport and an EU passport. And so after he passed away, and then my grandmother passed away, one of the things that she knew I wanted to do a lot was travel. I grew up in a really small town, like really small, 400 people. I always describe it as like a place with one stop sign that no one ever stopped at. Okay. Really, really small. And so she knew I wanted to get out and explore the world. And so when she left, one of the things that she really insisted I do with the very little bit of money that she had left was to travel. And so I went to Holland. With that passport that I had inherited when my dad passed away a couple of years prior to that. And so that was sort of when I discovered that heritage, the culture of the Dutch people. And I also went to England on that trip for the first time. So the reason I say it's probably more prevalent in my adult life is it was never really discussed growing up, and especially through the war times. It was really not something my grandmother ever wanted to talk about. There was a period of time during the war, her parents were actually she came from quite an affluent family. And at one point, the British government took over the school that her parents owned. It was a private preparatory school. And my great-grandfather had a mysterious fall from a second-story window. I don't really know the details about it are pretty vague, but as a consequence, the property was essentially taken from them. And so her definition of of simple would be very different than maybe yours or mine. And as related to that, it just meant that she lived very simply, very humbly, but she didn't reflect on that period in her life very much. At one point, I know that she specifically survived by eating tulip bulbs. It was a dark time, and so it wasn't until kind of the end of her life that she started to open up about it. But even that was pretty limited, for sure. So, yeah, heritage for me has really been born sort of in the later years of life, as opposed to someone who sort of grows up with it and is instilled in who they are, or maybe they're from that country and they immigrate themselves. It was different for me.
So what I hear is that, first of all, it's a journey for you, and it happened later in life, so you were already mature to go through the process and kind of dig into deeply. But also, like, what you mentioned about your grandmother not talking about that period of time, meaning wars, like, I think everybody, like everyone from my ancestry as well, including my grandparents and even great grandmother, that was something that they never talked about. I have a grandfather who was running from occupation, hiding in hay as a 4-year-old, and he never come back to those memories. And
yeah, I mean, I consider myself really lucky as a Canadian. We haven't experienced something like that, and frankly, I'm thankful for that, and I don't ever want to. But I think the relationship with that experience is so distant from my reality, it's hard to even fathom or imagine. It's pretty wild, but on the same token, understandable why they don't want to talk about those times. They were hard. They made them who they were, but challenging times nonetheless.
I would say even traumatic, and that's why those things are kept in secret for generations even, right?
Yeah, and in many ways, it's kind of a shame, because the story around how they became the people they are, even through those traumatic experiences, kind of gets lost. Yeah. My grandmother was, I know everybody says this about their grandmother, that their grandmother was the best grandmother on the face of the earth. But I'd go toe to toe to say mine was. She was incredible, and I know a lot of what made her who she was, but there's this giant gap in understanding some of the things that she went through. And, you never want to make someone visit those traumatic experiences again just for your own, maybe selfish knowledge. But when you think about it from an ancestral perspective, and even, just knowing your family and their experiences, it would be nice to have known. But, it's not the case. We piece it together as much as we can now. And, the best part is that she came out of it, and she was an incredible person as a consequence of it, and an amazing woman and an amazing grandmother.
We definitely gonna touch on that point, but the tea with the queen.
Tea with the queen, that was her.
And all the stories that your book contains, I really had a huge fun reading it and going through it, and I've got my notes on it as well. I
can see that. So. It's pretty well bookmarked.
Yeah, and underlined a couple places as well. It's pretty fascinating, and I can definitely relate to that part of the story where you want to know, you ask, and you are not being told. And like there are a couple sides to that coin. I wouldn't say two, because it's way more complicated than just traumatic experience and then like working it through and giving it further to next generations. But it definitely it's something not easy. However, it could enrich future generations, because like history loves to repeat itself. Right?
Does it ever? Yeah. I think we see that a lot, and I know this is not a political podcast, but I think we see those sort of things happening all around us today. And you look at certain segments of the population where they were persecuted, and it was en masse. And we can think about lots of these different communities, Jewish people, for instance.
That's right.
And the Jewish people today are convicted about who they are, and they know where they came from, and they are a strong community. Yep. They have a really strong presence in terms of heritage and who they are, community, if you will.
That's
and
right.
I think that's partly because the narrative is so well known and so spoken of. And so in the cases of, my grandmother, she's all but one person, but, when those individual collections of stories put together are lost, you're right, there's a missing link inevitably for future generations to reflect on and to really just know where they came from and the people that they were born of.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's so true. It's so true. And I know I'm taking you away from from food.
It's okay. I'm still smelling it. It's probably just as good as eating it.
Yeah. I want to ask if I were a person who doesn't know anything about your background, your culture, what would be the first thing that you would take me through or show me?
Oh gosh. I mean, I'm going to go back to mayonnaise on French fries. I mean, it's such a Dutch thing. And, some people look at me funny when I pile mayonnaise on my fries, but I can't help it. It's just something that when I did get there, I fell in love with. But I mean, culturally, really being Dutch and British, are more, I think there's more of a relationship between that sort of heritage and maybe my grandparents even, because they came from those countries, right? And I think that's probably a sad commentary actually on that, how heritage gets sort of distilled slowly but surely through generational, when generations move from one place to another and start to settle and create a new life. So, really there's not a real identity that I have with maybe being Dutch or being British or even Scottish. But what there is with all of those things is just proud of, my grandparents, really, because they grew up in those areas and they persevered through some really terrible times. And had they not, well, we wouldn't be here having this conversation, truthfully, right? So I think that's really where the pride of heritage for me comes in, is that connection with them to where they were born and ultimately where my roots are planted.
If you think about it, there's a lot of people who say they don't value their heritage in such a level, and it is so phenomenal. I ask my guests to scale their heritage influence or value they put on their heritage from 1 to 10, and the numbers vary from person to person, but it's like I have a person who's gonna say somewhere close to 1, which is not much, and 10, and a person who's gonna say 2 and person who's gonna say 8, they're gonna mean the same thing. It's just the perspective, right?
I think I can probably see both perspectives, right? When I think about it topically, I'd probably say 2 or 3. When I think about it more richly, like the example I just gave, as in, where you actually come from, and the fact that because the people from those areas, especially when those areas were affected by things like war, and that's the case with my grandparents, you take a little bit of a pause, which is something that's really important in my life, taking moments of pause. I would say the number jumps from 2 to 8 or 9 or 10 really quickly, right? So topically versus really considered, I think the number shifts.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And like there's so many things that I want to touch on in our conversation. I will though jump into your book because it's just a nice guideline for me to go after, and all the points and all the parts. And before we're gonna talk about Everyday Legacy, which is phenomenal in its simplicity, and it's really easy read, about 150 pages if I'm correct. And I swallowed it pretty fast. Awesome. and loved it. I was waiting for it for some time, and then when you published it, I was about to buy it, but then it was a wait time, and then I forgot about it. Then I ordered it, and then I bought it, read it, and just went through it pretty fast.
That's awesome.
Codi, you are the person who definitely is the one who works on personal legacy. You go through it because of your experiences, because of your the type of work you have been doing from early age. But I want to start with asking you, how do you feel you are different?
Oh gosh, loaded question, Matt. Loaded question. You know, I think that for me, because of the experience I had in the work that I did, and for context for your listeners, I worked in the funeral business, and I am still to this day a licensed funeral director and embalmer. And you know, when people think about that profession, first of all, there's an instant hesitation, like an immediate hesitation. They're either they want to repel very quickly, get away from it, or they want to lean into it. They want to know more. And typically the questions always circle around death. You know, they believe that the experience I might have had was all about death. And certainly there's a reality to that. There's a truth to that. But what I learned from that profession was actually way, 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 way more about life. And I think that experience, I know that experience has shaped how I show up in the world. There's sort of this omnipresent reality that death can be like right there. It can be right there, and you never really know. And that's not to be macabre and dark, and you know, that's not the point of it. The point of it is to say that when we can reflect on that reality briefly, even for a moment in time, we find that it can really propel us in life and living. And that's sort of where the magic is. And so I would say if there's one thing unique about me, it's probably that I look through that lens every single day.
I think the funny example is what you're wearing in your pocket in front of you, which I love, actually. Nice accent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the skull is representative actually of life. If you look back to, for instance, Shakespearean times, the skull was always in relation to living. And when you think about even Stoic philosophy, really the Stoics meditated on their death so that they would live more fully. You know, memento mori. That's where that comes from. And so it's sort of a perpetual reminder for me, not about my mortality, even though that's the underlying sort of tone. It's actually to live a lot. Yeah. Proudly, with conviction, and with a lot of kindness. I think that's probably the most important thing that I try and put into my life every day.
I will. It's so much to dig into, and I want to kind of dissect it in a way, which is a wrong word in your profession.
Well, we don't do any dissecting, so you're safe. You're safe.
So, with everyday legacy, you've got multiple elements that I love. You start with going about living your legacy on every day. Then you go through your own story and how you dealt with your father, or that tried to build that relationship, and actually it becoming a thing after his passing away. Then you've got the big part of your grandma, which was almost a parental figure, I would say.
Very much so. Yeah.
And then like ashram, touching by on the yogi, like the ego part, which is phenomenal, and I'm struggling with that every day.
Dude, we all struggle with that every day. That's not a you and now thing. That's an us and all the time thing. Truthfully, you know, the ego is the ego's a beast inside of all of us, and it's something that, you know, I struggle with every day. You know, one of the things I was really careful about when I wrote this book, and it's funny because I had two editors. And, you know, the editor that you can see in the book, her name is there. She was incredible. Actually, I had several editors. But the one that I'm thinking of was amazing. But initially, I had a different editor with a different publisher. And she was very academic in her approach, which, hey, I appreciate academia. But at the end of the day, I didn't want the book to be prescriptive. And she was really trying to steer me into very specific lessons with very specific takeaways. And to me, that's not legacy. Legacy is incredibly personal. It's ultimately the grand summation of how you have shown up in the world. I just think that's a hell of a long time for us to even rationalize in our minds. And so for me, the whole idea of everyday legacy is compartmentalizing that, thinking about legacy every single day, hence everyday legacy. That legacies, when we think about them and how we're showing up in the world, it wants us naturally to deepen and widen our impact. And so when we do that consciously, I really believe that it propels more of that. And hopefully it's something good in the world, right? Kindness,
That's right.
Faith, trust, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter as long as it's positive. And the challenge is when we think about things on a macro level, they're often, they look like mountains to climb. Doesn't matter whether it's, things that are due for work, doesn't matter whether it doesn't matter, even something like legacy. Really for me, legacy, I would say that the Trojan horse to legacy is really purpose and impact. So if someone who's listening is having trouble thinking about legacy because they're immediately going to that very North American view of death, which is death averse, I get it. It's fair. It's almost part of our culture in North America. And it's not like that in the whole world. It's not like that in many places in the world. However, if that's where listeners' brains are going, just think purpose and impact. When we put purpose and impact in front of our face every single day, we can't not but want to chase that. And so, and when those things are multiplying and doing good things in the world and making people feel good, and what I believe is creating a ripple effect of causing those people to want to do more good as well. I mean, listen, the world's a tough place to live in right now for a lot of people. That's true. And I sit, I think probably both of us do, in a seat of privilege, given the country we live in. And there's a lot of people with a lot less in the world who face battles that we can't even imagine every single day. And sometimes with not a lot of rest between those days. So I like to think that for what I can do in the world is just be a little kinder, be a little more patient, be a little more trusting, be a little more loving, whatever it is, whatever adjective you want to take and put in there. It's the adjective that is most important to you. It's the thing you want to do in the world. For me, it just happens to be the impact of kindness, really.
And I guess sharing the idea of making the impact and the legacy, the purpose itself every day, right? So
yeah, every single day. I think that is the challenge, and also the challenge. What I mean by that is it's challenging to think about it every single day, but it's also the challenge I give to myself every single day to think about. And it starts as soon as I wake up. Every day when I wake up, I open my eyes and think, thanks for another day. That might sound macabre. Some people might think that's kind of dark. Truth be told, I don't really care what it means to other people. All that matters is that it means something to me. And when that causes me to show up more powerfully in the world, and by world, I don't mean the globe. I mean my world, the people in my world. That's another macro thing. We always talk about put more kindness into the world. Well, the world is a really big place, and one act of kindness is like a drop in the ocean, right? It really has a very local effect, and that's how I tend to think about legacy. Is the people that are within my circles. How am I showing up for them every single day? Because as a consequence of how I show up for them, I also show up for myself.
How you show up for them is the way you show up for yourself. That's a nice one. And I cannot think about the part in the book where you were talking about the militant yogi,
the ashram
that you went by accident, but not.
Yeah, definitely by accident, and one of probably the best experiences in my life.
Do you still do, or do you think that the day, waking up every morning, every day was the breakthrough happened there, or after that period of time, or is it something that you work on daily as well? Because obviously it is challenging yourself, and it's being challenging.
Yeah.
But is it something that you got in a moment of truth or a breakthrough, or is it something that is constant work?
I'm a big believer that anything worth doing is usually not easy. You know, the hard stuff is the stuff that really matters. You know, it creates tenacity and it proves your ambition. It shows how passionate you are and how much you believe in something. So the hard stuff is the stuff that really counts. And so fortunately, I've been blessed with a lot of those times in my life where there's been a necessary perseverance. And there's always a lesson there. The trick is taking the time to distill it down to figure out what that lesson was. And even more important than that is actually applying the lesson, not once, but on the regular.
Yeah.
You know, that's hard to do. A lot of the reason why I didn't want to be prescriptive in this book in particular was because I didn't want to chart someone's course for them. We're all going to have individual experiences, and they come in the most random of places oftentimes, and sometimes in the most random of relationships, even still.
So true.
And so I think I think at the ashram there was certainly a couple of moments of awakening's a little too positive Pollyanna for me. I won't say it's what I refer to as a shoulder tap. You know, there was definitely some shoulder taps there at the ashram, just like there have been at many times in my life. They're on the regular for me. The trick is really paying attention to whatever you believe, if you believe in something bigger than us, be it the universe, God, Buddha, Allah. It doesn't matter to me, as long as whatever is steering you positively and to show up positively in the world. Then keep doing what you're doing. The minute you're a dick, that kind of changes things, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, be a good person, and so if whatever it is that's steering you to do that, just keep on keeping on. But look for those moments. Look for those moments, those shoulder taps, where whatever it is ushering you towards something, or saying, "Hey, you, pay attention." And sometimes, as I said in the book, sometimes those taps ultimately become a nudge. You know, for me, it's the universe. So the universe sort of saying, "Hey, stop, pay attention to this thing, or this person, or this experience, this moment, whatever it is." So I would say it's a very long answer to your short question, but the summary is pay attention. These moments to deepen our awareness of who we are in the world, the difference we can make, again, world being our world, not the world, they're all around us every single day. But you have to be courageous enough to look for them, and be even more courageous to apply whatever lesson exists in that moment.
It is, I will circle back to what you said earlier. It is a challenge to realize those moments and kind of be aware and grab that moment and kind of distill it down or even work on it, right?
Yeah, totally. It's work.
It
you know, life is not easy, at least not for most of us, I don't think. And for me, the thing that makes it richer is taking the time. It doesn't have to be a lot of time, even just a moment. Micro acknowledgement to just say, "Hey, I really appreciate that." The challenge, I think, for a lot of people is we say it to ourselves and we don't let it leave our lips. That's the downfall of really finding the power in these moments. It's powerful enough to have the experience, to have the reflection, to draw the lesson and think, "I'm going to apply that next time. I'm going to do that thing next time." It's even more powerful to turn to someone and say, "Hey, that thing you did made such a difference. That thing you did made me feel nostalgic. That thing you did propelled me to do this. Did you know when you said that, it caused me to do this?" We don't do that a lot.
No, we don't.
And when we do that, that's I think that's sort of the icing on the cake. And that to me is the thing that then propels the next person to let those words leave their minds and off their lips into existence for whoever it was that impacted them with whatever it was they were doing. So I think that's the real power in the equation.
There's a lot of there's a lot of things that I want to talk about, but I think we need to wrap it up. There's a lot of things that I want to talk about, but there's a lot of there's a lot of there's a lot of of a work that has to be done to be a better person and to work on your legacy, on that, what you mentioned in your book, the everyday legacy. It's everyday work, every day showing up. And it doesn't, like, with the Western world, we've got that kind of notion of that hustle and every day and being the best version of yourself, but also to that everyday legacy is the legacy to yourself, meaning, like, if you've got a bad day, take a day off and take care of yourself.
Yeah, hustle culture is crap, in my opinion. It breeds this incessant prescription of rolling over even the moments that we should be stopping for, and really sitting in those experiences. There's as much power in failure as there is in success. One could argue there's actually more power in failure than in success.
I'm on that side of that.
Right? So these, for me, I spent enough of my life on overdrive. And the longer I have taken time to pause, to really reflect on things that matter and people that matter, which is more important than the things, my life has become richer because of that reflection. And that reflection is not always rainbows and unicorns, right? Sometimes that reflection is painful, even traumatic in some cases. But again, things that are worth doing are not easy. And so if we want to show up in some way better than we did yesterday, we have to do the work. It requires us to not hustle over the stuff that also matters when it's not maybe the best stuff in the world to experience.
That's so true. And just acknowledging, and again, taking those moments, right? And like giving yourself a room to stop and consider and think about it, instead of just pushing through always without considering the cost of it.
How about just the sheer exhaustion of it? And I even today, I left my corporate work 10 years ago. I'm still in the same space, but I'm doing my own thing. In January, I'm celebrating my 10th birthday. And there has been probably more time to reflect in the last 10 years than there were in the 20 before that. But the only thing that caused more time was the decision to make more time. That's it. The time was there before, I just never took it. In fact, probably taking it would have slowed me down to a point that felt almost egregious, right? To a point that it was uncomfortable. And so that discomfort is actually what propelled me to continue to hustle. And I also look back and I'm very thankful for that time in my life. I wouldn't change it, mostly because it has brought me to where I am now and who I am now. But I will tell you that the time I have taken in the last decade with far greater reflection of both the good and the bad. And this is work that's ongoing, Therapy is a real thing. Yeah. It's a real good thing. And the work that I'm doing now, boy, oh boy, it's more daunting than it's ever been, but it's because it's harder. I also know from past experiences, again, that hard work is not fun, but necessary.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I'm curious to touch on the point where you said that you realize that to make time, you need to spend the time and figure out this is the moment to stop and spend time on this thing so I can propel my rocket faster in the future after this period is done. So was there a moment that you, any special event that happened that you realized, shoot, this is exactly what I have to do?
It was definitely in my corporate experience. I had a great gig with a great company and I worked with great people. But the culture in that organization did start to shift. I would say shift more, let me change the word, slip. There's a big difference in shift and slip. Slip is a temporary, it's something you slip and come back to. Is how I would probably describe it, except the slip was longer than I could tolerate. And for me, I was living out of a suitcase for a lot of my time with them. And there comes a point when you start to realize, hey, I could do what I'm doing on my own terms. And for me, that was entrepreneurship. That was starting the consultancy and speaking and writing the book and all those sort of things. Also a roller coaster to live for sure, but it's my own roller coaster. And so that defining moment for me certainly came, I would say there was definitely some moments at the ashram that sort of steered me that direction. It wasn't long after the trip to the ashram, actually, that I got my head on and thought, I think I'm gonna take off this very, very shiny pair of golden handcuffs and do this, and trust that I've packed my parachute well, ultimately, that I can jump off the cliff and pull that ripcord. And it's not only going to, put a parachute into the air, but that parachute's going to fill with air. And that air is the experiences that I've had over the last, many, many years. And that's the thing that will, fill that parachute safely to landing. And hopefully make me want to run back up the mountain and jump again. And that's the best part. I've been running up and down that mountain and flying down it for a decade. It's been a blast. But I think it's only been a blast because of the reflective piece. Really staying in touch with how I want to show up in the world, what ultimately I want my legacy to be when it is left. And thinking about that now steers me to think about it today, every single day.
I wanna. It is fascinating that a lot of people do not realize, and sometimes I feel like I'm losing a track of that myself, that you need to spend time to make more of it for the direction that you are heading, right? Sometimes you need to stop and just consider everything you were going through and all the pieces involving, and kind of do analysis of it, what worked, what didn't, and improve. But if you don't take that time, there is no chance you can continue on the that skyrocketing trajectory and being a hustler all your life, because it's leading directly to burning off all the fuel that is in the rocket, right?
Yeah. I really believe that we have to be selfful. And selfful is a made-up word that I made up, and I use it all the time. And it's the idea that oftentimes when we are raised to believe that when we spend time on ourselves, when we think about ourselves, it's selfish.
Yeah.
And truth be told, when we fill our cup first, we are of better service in this world to the people that we love, to the people in our community, to the people that matter the most to us, and to the things that we want to put our energy into. And I really believe in filling my own cup first, but I wasn't maybe at times even aware a cup existed. You just end up going so fast that the periphery is nothing but blur.
Yeah.
Right. And the challenge is, the objective way to look at it is that slowing down is the subjective piece, right? It's going to be different for everyone. Some people need to really stop, and others just need to slow.
Yeah.
Some people are going 40 kilometers an hour and others are going 150 kilometers an hour. So it's all subjective. The most important thing is just that you're in tune enough with your own well-being and the world around you, being your world again, to know when to tap the brake, when to slow down, and how long you have to slow down to fill that cup back up. It's going to be different for every single person. The challenge is just making sure you're doing it, because if you're not doing it, there's an inevitable capital B burnout at the end of that road in many experiences that I've seen, where people just can't keep going at that pace forever.
There's a lot of people who never realize that and go through life thinking that the hustle is all, and that they need to follow that path to be successful, to be someone, to be or not to be in the meaning of memento mori, right? But I wanna touch on the lessons that you got from one of hardest experiences that you had, and you describe in a book, which is your relationship with your father. And it was almost non-existent. And I remember there was I think it was a piece either that your mother said or your grandmother, I'm not 100% sure. And it goes something like that. Bob, he's not your friend, he's your son. It isn't about having an open door policy with your children, it's about meeting them where they need to be met, not the other way around. How do you feel that relationship built you? How hard those challenges were at the time, and how is the perspective of them today working in your favor?
I think context is important, first and foremost. The relationship with my father was nothing short of estranged, but only after my early teens. You know, he and my mom divorced when I was quite young, and there was, I would say, sort of a haphazard relationship. It happened, on holidays, not much in between, and inevitably there came a point that I just made the decision that I was not going to spend more time with him, and I was young to make the decision. I was probably only maybe 13, and that was actually the very moment when I had made that decision, that comment came from my mom to my father. And it's funny because in hindsight, there's an empathy for him and where he was. Not a forgiveness, because he chose to become a father, either on purpose or inadvertently. Either way, it's still a choice. But the empathy in that, I just don't think, let me recant that. I know he just wasn't supposed to be a father. He just wasn't supposed to be a dad. And so when I look back on it now, I'm empathetic to the fact that relationship, the father-son relationship, was a real struggle for him. It was not an easy relationship, and he didn't know how to navigate it. And he had no map. His father and he did not have a good relationship. His father died not long after the war. They came to Canada and then passed away, a few years later. And truth be told, his roadmap was non-existent. And so if you're not destined maybe to be something, and then on top of that you have no guidebook when you find yourself in that situation, you can be pretty lost, right? We've all been in those scenarios where we feel completely disconnected from the experience we're having, and nothing, no tool we're given helps us sort of steer us. And I think that was him in fatherhood. And so at the time, I remember thinking how unfair it was that, all my friends had dads and they had great relationships. And, when I was growing up, divorce wasn't at the rates it is today. So that the presence of a male figure in their lives was something that I really wanted, and not something that I really got initially with my stepfather. My mom remarried when I was 7, so about 4 years later. And the man that she married, my stepfather today, was, someone who I just didn't necessarily identify with in terms of how he showed up in the world. And what I mean by that was he grew up, with dirt floors in a farmhouse and 8 kids, fighting for what food there was. They were a very blue collar family. Education was almost secondary to them, as in most of them went through high school and that was it. I'm not entirely sure all of them even finished high school. And, he was a guy that could fix anything. He could get under a car and do an oil change and build a house and all these things that were so foreign to me at that age. I mean, I was, quote unquote, a city kid. Now, the city kid at the time, this was before we moved to the town of 400 people. But even still, it was still only a population of, 25,000 at the time. But it was such a foreign concept to me, the way he lived, that we never met on any sort of plane. And so that male figure that I longed for, a father figure, just really was not there. And so the lessons that I've really drawn after his death, which only came from a moment of pause, it only came from a lot of reflection, and through the experience of his funeral, to understand that while he was not born to be a father, there's no question he was an incredible friend. That takes a giant leap in terms of perspective. There's a lot of people who have said to me, yeah, but that doesn't discount that you deserved a dad. No, you're probably right, it doesn't. But I can either find comfort in that reality, which I can't change. I can't go back and change the time he was here, and now that he's gone, there's nothing to change in the future, except my relationship with who he was to me. And how powerfully the lessons that he gave me, distilled down and applied, can be used. And so I think that is the thing really that steers me now, is knowing that we're not built to be everything to everyone. So why not spend time nurturing the thing we are meant to be to the people we are meant to be them to?
This is such a great concept, but there is one big but to it. You need to know who you're supposed to be and to whom you're supposed to be that person, right?
There's a big but there's an easy answer. It's where you feel most alive and with whom you feel most alive with. That's it. It's not a complicated equation. Where do you find yourself in the world where you illuminate, where you feel the happiest, where you feel almost like an alignment with, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is who I'm supposed to be. This is how I'm supposed to show up. This is it. That's where you're supposed to be. And until you find that, and until you find those people, do not give up. That experience is there. Those people are there. You just have to find them. That's community. That's taking the time to build the community, and also understand that people are in your life for a reason, a season, and sometimes, if you're lucky, a lifetime. And understanding that when you meet people, it's okay for them to be in any of those categories, as long as for the time they are there, for whatever reason, season, or lifetime, that you take the lessons that they can give you, and hopefully you can impart some to them, and feel alive.
Yeah, it's so true that people through the lifetime, they come for different periods of time for us or with us, right? And sometimes we got fixated on, why this friendship didn't work out or that friendship didn't work out. Like, I even looking back from my early years of entrepreneurship and me trying to help my buddies and employ them in one of my first businesses, giving them work and stuff like that, and then obviously losing those friendships. Looking back at it from the perspective of time, this gave me a big insight to both who I am and how I should approach things, how should I structure things, and those people were there for a reason. Pre that situation, they were for partying and having a good time, but when we moved to the professional zone, it suddenly became obvious that this is not the area for them, and we need to move to the next level. And it is beautiful that you also mention it, that you just need to realize and kind of look at life and your relationships from that perspective, right?
Yeah, it's the winning equation. And it does not need to be. In fact, I would almost submit that when it is complicated, either you're overthinking it, or your ego's too much at play, or it's just not the right spot for you, or it's not the right person for you. I think what keeps us there is the dominance of our ego. I should. People spend an inordinate amount of time shoulding all over themselves. I should do this, I should do that. And oftentimes we project those expectations onto other people.
Oh, yeah.
You should do this, you should be that way. That's That's ego and that's control. And I mean, that's even something I struggle with. You know, I am a type A anal retentive control freak. And mostly because it has served me really well professionally. The challenge is really understanding the line between it as a tool and it as a hindrance. It's almost the fine line between observation and obsession, right? You know, it's a very fine line. And listen, it's a dance. And sometimes you step on the toes of that line, and other times it seems graceful. It's not perfect. None of us are. Perfection's a damn illusion that too many people spend too much time striving for. It just doesn't exist. It just does not exist. And so acknowledging that disables that control, I mean, at least a little bit for a little while, if I'm lucky. And for others, hopefully it does the same. But yeah, ego and control they're real bastards to deal with. They're not easy to deal with.
So true. So true. Let's dig into that ego part. Like, what are the tools? What are the possibilities that you can like dissect, go deeply into, understand, and also work it through and work it every day? Because it's like different people, different cultures have different visualizations of that. Ego, alter ego, all that. One another can say angel and the devil whispering to your ear and all that.
Yeah.
Like, from a perspective, how you work with it and how you make sure that you are progressing in the right direction.
The biggest thing is being aware of it, right? I also think defining it is important. For me, it's that voice in my head that says you can't, or you shouldn't, or have you thought about this, or what will that person think? All those things that steer us maybe a different direction or off course from where we should really be going. Or worse, keep us stuck where we shouldn't be. So it's understanding, first of all, how it's defined for you, and then starting to recognize what it sounds like. And when you do those things, you become increasingly aware. It's almost like knowing the way to a certain destination. And once you've been down that road 10 times and you've done the sequence, you never get lost. Right? So listening to and understanding, listening to the voice and understanding how you define it creates this path that you instantly recognize it. I'm pretty good at recognizing, I will say, when my ego is having not a great day. I can hear it. It's loud. It's the voice inside my head that is maybe the voice of doubt or the voice of concern or curiosity, but not positive curiosity. Those are moments for me that I instantly take the time to question, wait a second, is that me or is that my ego? And I get it wrong all the time. I get it wrong all the time. The important part is to look back at those moments. Maybe, for some people it's meditating, for other people it's journaling, for other people it's just sitting on the couch and having a beverage of choice and reflecting on the day. There's no prescribed way to do this. And I'm certainly not going to tell anyone there is. It's different for every single person, but it's in those moments when you look back at those interactions or those environments or experiences and you say, gosh, I could have handled that differently.
How do you, though, fight your reptilian brain saying fight or flight and it's a reactionary and it's so built so hard? Like I see it in myself, like some of the reactions, especially the anger one, because that's my primary one that goes through like crazy. It's that that dragon coming through, or whatever you may call it, the werewolf who is thirsty for blood, right? That's the only way it's going to be satisfied, when it drinks, right? Or tears things apart. So how you approach that? Because one thing is realizing and knowing, and another thing is once you are in that rage or tantrum, depending on the emotion that is feeding you, because everyone is different. In my case, it's a rage or anger. How you overcome that and just go and work it and kind of would you take time off? Would you, as you say, meditate, or would you just figure out a way how to, I don't know, disconnect or move yourself somewhere else?
Using the travel analogy again, if you never take the time to study the map, you'll never know where you're going.
That's right.
There is a reason that the rear view mirror is smaller than the windshield. And so looking forward through that giant windshield is certainly the time where you should spend your energy. If we spent all of our time looking in the rearview mirror, there'd be accidents, galore. But it's certainly something good to check every so often. So for me, it's a practice in those moments where I have, gone off kilter, or maybe gotten, flown off the cuff, or been angry about something, or reacted in a way that I'm not sure I would be maybe proud of. Reflectively, I'm not proud of.
Yeah. Is
taking the time to just evaluate the map, to study it, to say, how could I have behaved differently? I also, for me, it's a big question around energy expense, which is invaluable when you consider the disproportionate amount of energy you spend being angry or mad or stubborn or whatever your reaction is to that situation where the ego is the dominant player, versus taking a deep breath and having what I often refer to as an adult conversation. Can we have an adult conversation? And that
with yourself,
with myself sometimes, often with myself, but even with others. Hey, can we talk about this? This didn't land well for me. I'm definitely part of the equation. I was part of the problem. I shouldn't have reacted the way I did, but I'd love to revisit it when you're ready. There's a level of vulnerability in not only evaluating the map to know how to navigate properly, but even more vulnerability in having that conversation with the person that you might have not had the best interaction with or the best experience with. And again, I say this not as someone who's professing to do this well often. I do it okay sometimes. But the piece after, again, that reflective piece, that part is non-negotiable for me. That part is something I force myself to go through. Does it equip me to be perfect the next time? No, but it inches me closer to a result that I maybe don't have to spend so much time being critical or even to evaluate that experience with that person. So I honestly think the ego plays such a cruel role in most people's lives. We could probably have an 8-hour podcast just about, how challenging it can be to sort of overcome that voice, overcome that ego. But first step for listeners, understand, first of all, how you define it, and then understand, probably even more importantly, what it sounds like. And then the awareness of it to catch it and then reevaluate those two things. It's a constant evaluation. The good thing is it doesn't take a lot of work. It just takes work.
Yeah, and if you consider, to the point that you had earlier, if you consider the time expenditure on the time you spend on being angry compared to your time of reflection, like the reflection is minuscule.
Yeah.
And gives so much more.
And forget time, energy, just the energy expense. It takes a lot of energy to be angry.
Yeah.
A lot.
That's true.
I can't remember. There was some saying when I was growing up that it takes more muscles in your face to frown than it does to smile. I frankly do not know if that's medically true, but along that same line, there's no doubt that anger, resentment, harboring, tough feelings or experiences, being stubborn again, those things, they take a lot more energy than just working through something. And they are likely paving a path when you can have that vulnerability and that courage, that, to have that courageous conversation first with yourself and then maybe with others. It makes the path a lot easier to travel in the future. And in fact, maybe one that you want to travel, as opposed to the alternative, which is never go down that road again with that person or doing that thing. And that's a shame, because that road can provide a really valuable lesson in and of itself, just in the moment, let alone what may come from reconciling and moving past that. But reconciliation of egos, it's a thing with none other than the person in the mirror, first and foremost.
I remember myself going through the moments where I basically looked at myself and was either angry for being angry, or either just not happy with all the process, the waste of time, the whole emotional roller coaster, all the ways that I could do it better. But to your point, it's that moment of reflection gives way bigger chance for you to make it better next time than not doing it at all.
The fact that you just said spending time reflecting on those moments, that is a path that you've now created, and that's now not a hard reflection for you to have. The challenge for all of us is getting to the lesson at the end of whatever that was, and then using it beneficially in our lives and the lives of the people around us.
And shortening the amount of time from the outburst to the reflection, I guess.
Yeah. And better yet, maybe getting to a point that the outburst isn't even happening. Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
Codi, I want to hear your definition of a failure, or what is. Let's start, because we touched on it a little bit earlier, but let's start with, what is your failure story?
I think the easy answer is there's too many to count. There isn't one that is highlighted for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was ready with my definition, so let me throw the definition out, because I think it adds context to what I'm trying to say. And that is, failure. The definition of failure to me is that it's incredibly uncomfortable and incredibly necessary.
Mm-hmm. Like a stepping stone.
It provides so much context for how rich an experience can be when it does eventually go well. Mm-hmm. And so for me, God, there's been so many times when it hasn't gone right, or hasn't gone the way I thought, the way I had intended my control to steer it. Mm-hmm. Where you feel inevitably, as someone who likes control, completely out of control, right? And so that in and of itself is a massive challenge to think about. But again, it's one of those necessary conversations you have to have with yourself, is to understand how valuable failure can be. And in fact, in a lot of the consulting work that I do, failure is one of the core values that we embrace. Not only in the small team that I've got, but also in the organizations that I work with. They provide navigational tools to know where not to go again, mm-hmm. Where maybe your limits are, or your threshold, and ultimately your possibility. Failure shows us what our possibility is. We have to have the courage to get back up. Yeah. And that's probably an overplayed analogy. You get hit, you get knocked down, you stand back up. You get knocked down, you stand back up. There's an important third step, which is evaluate the time you were down, mm-hmm. to figure out how to get up faster the next time. That's the third piece that I think gets missed way too often. It's not just getting back up. It's the process, the entire process of what knocked you down, what you felt when you were down, what came up when you were down, and then how quickly you were able to rise. So there's too many to count. It's a terrible question.
So, on contrary, what does success mean to you?
Without question, success is happiness. It isn't riches. It isn't things. There's one thing that I have never seen in all my years of being around funeral homes, and that is like a U-Haul attached to a funeral coach. We're not taking it with us. Stuff is just stuff. There's a reason auctioneers are in the estate business, because we collect crap our whole lives, and then eventually it's got to go somewhere to someone else to collect, and then that crap, and it's the cycle of stuff.
Never ending.
It's never ending, and I'm guilty sometimes of stuff too. But it doesn't go with us. What goes with us is our experiences and our memories. And so ultimately, I think the definition of success is just to be happy. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter. Richness is not a bank account to me. Richness is the quality of friendships, the quality of experiences, the memories. Those are the things. And there may be people listening absolutely rolling their eyes. That's okay. Maybe they define success differently, but for me, that's absolutely what it is. And it's interesting with age, and I'm not old by any stretch of the imagination, but somehow that gets more and more important. Every single year, it just gets more important to understand that the value of your life ultimately is tied for so many of us to success.
Yeah.
But how we define that success is probably the more important conversation to have.
I cannot agree. I couldn't agree more. It's definitely the definition is so important, and that's why I always kind of try to grab it, because it's also different for everybody, right? So
yeah,
and that's the beauty of it too.
It's also okay. Yeah, if we were mirror images of each other, the world would be a pretty boring place. It's pretty great that we're not.
So true.
And so yeah, there's always objective realities and there's always subjective realities, and understanding that there is neither, that it's not one or the other, it's often both, it's key.
So true. So true. Codi, we connected through an initiative that you had back over 5 years ago. That was the time when we connected, I guess.
Yeah. I was thinking actually about that as I was driving here. I was thinking, how did Matt and I meet? And then I remembered it was over dinner.
Yes.
Apropos to being served dinner here with you.
That's so true. You didn't manage to eat too much.
I did. It's this thing with talking and eating, right?
That's right. That's right.
Again, I can still smell it, and sometimes that's nourishment enough for the soul.
I want to know, and I want to figure out, first of all, what propelled you to get that initiative going? The dinners with strangers, right?
Yeah. So the initiative, again, context, is something that I started many years ago, originally with a friend who moved on to other things. But the concept was bringing a room full of strangers together and sitting and talking over the course of 4 or 5 hours, over many courses, probably an equal number of courses, and just having very real conversations. There's something about being in a room with people you don't know that enables conversations you probably have never had, because there's no accountability. There's no one there that knows you. There's no one there to follow up, unless perhaps you create a friendship at the table, which happened endlessly, frankly. But the richness of those friendships that happened around that table were so intense, because the depth of vulnerability and courage that people had to share some of the things that they shared was significant.
So true.
To a level that oftentimes people would admit they hadn't even shared with their significant others or their family. So the spirit of the initiative, which was called From Strangers to Family, .com, if anyone wants to look it up. I haven't run any of the dinners since COVID. The restaurant that we did do them at had some changes, and it is definitely an initiative. I used to call it like my passion project. It wasn't something that made any money. That wasn't the purpose of it. The purpose was just to come together and break bread with strangers, between 8 to 10 strangers around the table. And it was a facilitated event, so we could so the conversation wasn't intense immediately. It was a build, it was sort of gradual, as you'll recall. And for me, it was so brilliant to watch. I've always been fascinated with humans, and more importantly than just humans, human connection. And really what makes people tick. That really is something that fascinates me. And so watching this experience sort of unfold in front of me was a case study for that human experience. And that vulnerability can move way faster in an echo chamber, which those rooms really provided. They really did provide that sort of experience. No one knew anyone for the most part. Sometimes we had some collisions, but where people did maybe have an awareness of each other, but no one was given last names. It was only first names. If you wanted to connect, it was on your own terms. And I think it was Brene Brown that said, the speed of relationships travels at the speed of vulnerability, or the depth of relationships travels at the speed of vulnerability. Either works, frankly. And that room proved that to be very, very true. It was a really cool experience, one that I'm looking forward to getting back to at some point.
It is so phenomenal because I feel exactly about this experience the same way. The speed of the relationship is growing thanks to having those deep conversations over here. It's phenomenal. And it was a definitely experience of that dinner was the first real connection that I made in Canada, and we've been here for I guess couple months already.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
the context that you just gave me in I mean I didn't count the words, but it was it was probably 8 or 10 words. That to me, people always want to ask me about how do I know if I'm living my legacy every day? What are the indications I look for? That's it right there. That encapsulates it. When we articulate out of our brains, through our mouths, with our words, as my sister says to her young kids sometimes, use your words. And when we as adults use our words, you just totally gave me the perspective of, again, like totally articulated my lens by you sharing that was one of the first connections. I didn't know that you had just come to Canada until right now at that point. I didn't know those were the first connections you made. I didn't know the difference they made to you. That's awesome. I'm so glad that you reached out and wanted to come to a dinner and came. I didn't know it was that powerful for you.
It was definitely because we came here and we went through lonely journey. It was only us two, and I was going to all those networking events, all those kind of scratching the surface and sending how are you kind of 5-sentence conversations, to where we moved to such a deep hours-long conversations. And the funny thing is I think if I think about it from the perspective of time right now, it was the first time for me personally where there was more than a close relationship, where I shared my biological father's story. Multiple people estranged to me, and it was the first time, even though I was going through that process already, and I was sharing that more and more. I had our friends that I shared with, but this was the first time that I did it like in public to people I didn't know. And it just flooded from there, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I created that event was because I had been to too many of those. First of all, I don't really like people that much. For me, surprisingly to a lot of people, especially given that I live a lot of my life on stages and in front of other people speaking, it surprises people to know that I'm a massive introvert. I do not get my energy from social interactions. In fact, they drain the life out of me. And I was going to a lot of these networking events and getting home exhausted with quantity but not quality. I'd reach into my pocket and I'd pull out 30 business cards back in the days when we used business cards, which really was not that long ago. We most things are digital now, especially post COVID.
Yeah.
And it was pretty unlikely that I would actually in my mind be able to draw my attention back to who the person was or the conversation we had.
For sure.
And most things that matter in our lives are quality-based things. Rarely is it a quantity-based thing. And it was the same with networking. As an entrepreneur, you want to be networking, you want to be meeting people, you want to build your own sort of company, if you will, of like-minded people, because entrepreneurship is a roller coaster. It's up, down, and all around. And having others in the space to say, hey, is this normal? Is this how I should be feeling? I'm having this reaction. Should I be having that reaction? Having that network is really important. That community is critical to the success of a lot of entrepreneurs. I just was not getting that in the quantity method of networking as it was. And so the whole idea behind From Strangers to Family was to really deepen those relationships and build quality. It doesn't mean everyone, got on with everyone, that everybody wanted to connect, but sure enough, there was a heck of a lot more connection there than in any networking event I'd ever been to.
For sure.
So that means a lot that it resonated the way it did with you. It means that the purpose or the spirit behind the event, the night, is intact. It's doing what it's meant to do, which is whatever it needs to do for you or whoever it is that's at the table.
It sounds that you went through the process to solve your own problem of not wanting to get to around so many people, sift through them. Basically, you made your own funnel that sifts people through for yourself and end up kind of giving the same experience to others.
I think that you just define the entrepreneurial experience, right? Which is when you can't find the thing you need, you figure it out. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs, gritty people who, have determination and grit like I've never seen before. And they have that because oftentimes they have to build the thing they need. It's not already there. It's not something that's already on the shelf. And so that grit and determination, that resilience, perseverance, all comes. Those are ingredients that are born out of these kind of situations. And yeah, you're 100% right. I hated networking events. They drained the life out of me. In fact, even though I would leave, tired from these, mostly because they were 4 and 5 hours long, and I was very full, as you'll recall, it was course after course after course, sometimes too much. However, I always left with more energy than I came with. And that to me was really important. And so listeners understand too that there was no business talk at these events. It was, you were able to introduce yourself and say sort of what space you were in or what your, quote unquote title was, what industry, but that was it. It was not a, what business challenge are you facing now? And it was none of that. It was meant to inspire us to really deepen the relationships with the people that are all around us that so often we breeze past. There's so much value around us in terms of experiences and people. And it's just humanly, I think, impossible to take it all in, but it isn't humanly impossible to create the space to invite it in. And that's really what the spirit of these dinners were meant to do and will be meant to do in the future.
Looking forward for more of them coming.
Yeah, I think we should do a reunion dinner. Yeah.
That would be cool.
Now, that would sort of break the strangers part, but from estranged family to family. Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
On last note on that subject, how many of those connections that you made, how many dinners did you finally make, and how many of the people that have been there are still in touch and you've got relationships with?
Yeah, I think I'm in touch with probably most of them to a large degree. In some capacity, it might not be to the same depth it was that night, but there's a connection. And more importantly, there's a connection where I have a different appreciation for who they are in whatever role they're playing. Because the role is, who really cares what it is they're doing?
Yeah.
It's, are they doing what they're doing with passion and conviction and belief? And is there a way that I can support that, knowing who they are and how they're showing up in the thing that they are doing? That's really what the dinners do. That's ultimately the grand benefit of them. And I think there's probably about a dozen or so dinners, unfortunately, before COVID came along and changed all of that. But and I know some other people that do similar type of events that moved online. To me, that was not the experience I wanted to create. I'm very much it's kind of an oxymoron, because I got done saying people exhaust me, but I like being in rooms with people. Yeah. It's that real time experience that I so appreciate. And it wasn't to me, while there could have been a digital solution, there was no digital solution.
Yeah. I think the big difference between what you are describing as the experience that you created and all the networking events are, for me, it's a nice metaphor towards going to the networking event and having a lot of those short, fast interactions, which basically just steal your energy, towards comparing it to the deep, long conversations that kind of, while they go, they just produce more of it, right? More of the energy.
Yeah, it does. It sort of pulls back the veil to a significant depth for some people. I mean, without breaking the confidence of those who attended, some of the conversations, some of the things that were tabled as sort of challenges in those people's lives. In fact, one person shared with me that the thing that they had put to the group was something they hadn't told anyone ever in their life. And this person was probably in their mid to late 40s. And the cool thing was there was such a range, a diversity of people at those tables, from, you know, young 19, 20-year-old people that wanted to come to, I think probably the eldest person was in their late 60s, early 70s. So such a gamut of experience. And the really cool thing to see happen there was when they stepped into the room, in the spirit of how the event was intended, it all sort of leveled out. It flattened. And everyone was appreciated for how they were showing up and the vulnerability with which they were sharing. And truth be told as well, not everybody got as vulnerable. But at least in my experience, the ones that did walked away with a richer experience.
It is so true. Definitely. Like, unforgettable experience for me. 100%. And yeah, anyone who listens when Codi gonna get back on it, definitely need to try it. So, Codi, tell me, who is a maverick for you? What's your definition?
What's my definition of maverick? The definition of a maverick for me is someone who is courageously, unabashedly but kindly charting their way in the world, and by how they are doing that, inspiring others to do the same. Which, oddly enough, or coincidentally enough, is the whole idea around legacy. It's just being true to who you are and the gifts that you have and how you're deploying those into the world for a greater level of impact and to inspire others to do the same. So I guess you could say that if you're living your everyday legacy consciously, on the regular, we won't maybe say every day for people, that's a lot to bite off for some people, but consciously, more often than not, in many ways, you are likely a maverick to someone else. I hope that I've been a maverick to others.
Yeah.
The beauty of that is we don't get to say we are. It's somehow more pure and more powerful even to be told, which is why, again, speaking these things into existence is so important. I had a really good friend of mine yesterday post. We met at a speaking event many, many years ago now. I think it was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And we just went out for lunch just the other day. And he was a young guy at the time. And I remember seeing him on stage and thinking, you know, sometimes just in whatever moment you're in whatever circumstance, it's what I refer to as a finger snap moment. It's just that instant, like, oh, there's something there. He's got something. This could maybe be more for him. I don't even know if he knows that you can be a speaker as a career. So I made a conscious effort. It was actually a competition, and one of the prizes was to spend an hour with me in a mentorship kind of call, or over lunch or dinner, or what, didn't matter to me. And there were several other, gifts given by the quote unquote judging panel. I hate that term, but that's what we were. And he didn't win. He didn't win. It wasn't purely my choice. It was a panel decision. And I went up to him after and I said, hey, I know you didn't win, but if you want, I'll give you the same time. And I say this not in a braggadocious kind of way. I say it in a way, hopefully, that can inspire someone, that when you have that finger snap moment, when you have that experience to say, hold up, there's a chance that with my experience or the experiences I've had, that I could maybe share with someone some insights that might inspire them, that maverick behavior.
Yeah.
That is, I would say, mission accomplished if that's what this conversation does. And that's exactly what I did with Sam. And it's interesting because we took a photo that day and we took a photo 2 days ago. And 4 years it's an easy thing to say, but the richness that my life has had because he's in it is it's almost inexplainable. The cool thing is, by virtue of him doing a social post just the other day, it's quite mutual. You know, we have just such an appreciation for how the other is showing up in the world that it becomes sort of an undeniable thing that you can't but not want that person more in your life. And that's community. We should all be striving to build those kinds of communities. When you asked earlier what the definition of success is, for me, it's happiness. And having a community of people that are just trying with every bit of energy they have to make their world, hopefully as a consequence, the world, a better place. I mean, I have all the time in the day for those people. And so that's a maverick. Long answer,
but a beautiful one. Yeah, definitely. There are those moments that you know, for you, the finger snap moments, but they might be as little as feeling that you need to help somebody. Just give them a helping hand, whatever that might be at the moment, but it's something that goes directly from a deep within, from the gut, and it's, if you deny it, I had those moments when it would not relate to the deep experience that you had, but I had situations where I was just driving and saw someone that needed help, and I passed. And I was driving, and then there is that thing in the gut when it's not gonna let go. And I know myself, if I cannot tame it down, I turn around and get back at it, right? To help that person. And it happened so many times in my lifetime, not necessarily in a way of driving around, but going past through it, thinking about it, and it's like, nope, I cannot pass without doing something. So yeah, that's definitely.
Well, it's actually a really good point, because a lot of people think gestures and kindness have to be grand, and they don't. A lot of the most beautiful moments in our lives happen in the seemingly inconsequential times. You know, when the things that we are doing to us might mean nothing, but to someone else might mean the absolute world. Yeah. And that can be as simple as a smile. You know, we live in this culture. Great analogy. You know, bought a home several years ago, so I'm not in the elevator culture of condominium living anymore. Thankfully, however, I can't count the number of times I got in the elevator and the people in the elevator were more interested in talking to their dog than the humans around them, or staring at the ceiling or watching the numbers. And it plays out in movies all the time. People get on the elevator and they stare at the numbers, and as soon as the doors open, they can't wait to escape. That isn't a movie thing. That's a reality thing. Yeah. It's an absolute reality. And just taking the time to say good morning. It's surprising how many people are caught off guard by those things now. Yeah. And so, in fact, I sometimes try to do them on purpose. Mostly to be disruptive, but admittedly, also just to change the script a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah, to go against the grain.
That's also a Maverick's quality, being disruptive for sure. But Yeah, it's a big thing. Especially COVID didn't help us all at all. Like these days, some people are still in that flight. I wouldn't say even fight. Most of the people that I see around that are still they are still in that period of time, and I cannot just wonder how I could possibly help them. And very often they don't want any help, and it's sad, and it's also terrifying for a number of reasons, because I feel like very often we are regressing as a society in that term. We need each other to be better as a human beings, and we strive together, even though we might be like yourself, not necessarily cultivating the energy of multiple people around us, but more introverted. But it's still in reality, we need other people.
Yeah, I mean, herd mentality is. I mean, years ago, many years ago, numbers mattered. Numbers are what sometimes kept you alive, yep. And that brain is still very much a part, I think, of our DNA and who we are. So community is critical. There's no question we need people. It's just, who are the people?
That's true.
That's the most important piece, that you're actually qualifying the people that are in your life, and you're also willing to not take the time for the ones that shouldn't be there. And that is often the harder road to travel.
Oh, yeah.
Several years ago, it was just before the pandemic, oddly enough, before the book by Mark Manson came out about the subtle art of not giving a fuck.
Yeah.
And I had said that year was the year of zero fucks for me. Maybe I should have written the book first, Mark, but anyway. But for me, it was really about getting clarity around who was in my life, who added value, and who was an energy vampire. Who was just sucking the life out of me and circumstances. And it is not a fun road to journey, especially when you're cutting perhaps people out of your life.
Yeah.
But it is a critical step. Jim Rohn once said, he was a sort of a modern day philosopher of personal growth and development. He passed away several years ago, but certainly his legacy and his work shows up every single day, in lots of people's lives. And he had this theory that we are ultimately the sum of the 5 people we spend the most time with.
Yeah.
And when you think about that, it makes you really think about the people you spend the most time with.
So true.
And it causes you to evaluate, if I'm the summary of the people I spend the time with, do I like the total that is reflected in who I am? Mm-hmm. For me, when I look back, many times in my life, but in particular that year, I did not like all the company I was keeping. So it was certainly an evaluatory phase in my life, where I really took the time to think about who I was spending my energy with and my time with. And the best part of that exercise, as hard as it is to journey, the best part is that it creates crystal clarity around the qualities, attributes, values, and characteristics of the people that should be occupying your time. And circle of 5 might be 2 or 3 when you sort of disrupt it, but they be sure as shit, the 4th and 5th are going to be almost perfectly aligned with who you think your time should be spent with.
Yeah.
And so it's a really good exercise for people to go through, because like you said, that community is critical. That herd mentality is part of, I think, our DNA as humans. So we need people around us, but who they are is that's the most important piece.
A lot of people will not like that when I'm gonna say it, but I figured through my own experiences to be selective towards people and the relationships that I'm building, because that's the only way forward if you want to keep on growing, because otherwise you're gonna get stuck.
So you're interviewing me, but I'm curious. Now I'm gonna ask you a question. You qualified that by saying there's some people that won't like what I'm about to say.
Yeah, because when you say I'm selective, it means that you basically don't value certain things, you do not accept certain things. You will say, like, a lot of people, I'm saying we, me and wife, we being Europeans and being from Central Europe, a lot of people will say Eastern, we are really straightforward. And I do not walk around the bush. I go at it, like I'm gonna say what is on my mind. Very often, and I will, like, and a lot of Canadians don't like that, right? Or not even Canadians, but a lot of people in today's society, Western society, is built this way, that we don't talk real deep. And if I say what I think, that is making first selection straight away.
Yeah, it's interesting that you qualified it, because immediately when you said there are people that won't like what I'm about to say, what that said to me was the thing you are about to say is not of value to the people who won't like the thing you're about to say.
Yeah.
So it probably would be an exercise to ask those people if they've ever been concerned about where they spend their energy. And the likelihood is the answer would be no.
Yeah.
The things that we often complain about out loud are the things that we have no attachment to in our own worlds. And that's what makes it so easy to bitch about them, right? It's to complain. That's what makes that path easy to take. It's also the path of least resistance. It's the easy way to go.
It is. And I would add to it as well, the things that we bitch the most about is very often a reflection of ourselves that we don't like.
100% it is. Or the thing that we wished we had the courage to do, or the vulnerability, or took the time to evaluate, or to do. So that is, it's a hard nut to crack, but getting through that outer hard shell of other people's expectations in our worlds is it's so valuable when we can. And part of doing that exercise is getting to a point that other people's opinions of you don't matter.
Yeah, that's right.
They just don't matter. And that is, you call it selective. Some could say particular, or one might even, with a bit of perspective, call that thoughtful. You say selective in a negative context, and I think, no, it's actually quite thoughtful. That you are concerned enough about the people that occupy your world.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely thoughtful is a better description of the approach I have. And yeah, just saying selective, it puts me in a point where I feel that it might not be good, where at the end of the day, I know it is. And it's just the wording sometimes, right?
Yeah, it's the wording. I love when people ask me, how are you? How are you?
That's not the question that I like to ask. I rather ask you, how are you feeling, or how have you been?
I agree. How are you is very superficial. But the response to that question, when you think about it, can actually articulate the conversation that you want to get to. So oftentimes when people ask me, how are you? I will respond with, I'm grateful. How are you? Because when we say that, not only does it highlight what we value, which for me is sort of in perpetual gratitude. That's something that's very important to me. And it doesn't mean that I think about it incessantly, nonstop, in a Pollyanna positivity kind of way. But I can tell you, I stop myself more often than not to be thankful for, the people and the experiences in my life all the time. The analogy that I often use is performance reviews at work, right? First of all, no one likes them. But the reason no one likes them is because you have one, let's say on October 1st, last quarter of the year, you have your evaluation.
Yep.
And something goes downhill at work on November 1st, but you won't hear about it until the next October at your next performance review.
Yeah.
So we're talking about spending, 10 or 11 months harboring something that just happened instead of talking about it right now. Let's talk about it. Let's overcome it. Let's not let that create any barrier between either our relationship or your success, any of those things. It's the same thing. If we are just willing to have those conversations right now, it opens the door to so much more possibility. And that isn't a positivity thing. That's just a practical thing.
There is such a depth to that wisdom, that's for sure. And you can't, like, forever, anyone watching, it's just you can sip it as a good beverage.
I keep forgetting people are watching. I'm so conversations like this, when you consider the quality of the people in your life, it's inevitable that all of the outputs or all of the offspring of that thing at the center of it are likely also really good. So the fact that we met how we met, you had the experience you met, here we are back again now 4 years later having another deep conversation. We've probably gone off tangent. You're probably nowhere near on script. No. We're probably running way over time. It doesn't, all of that becomes sort of inconsequential because when the world melts away, it's an indication that whoever it is or whatever you're doing, and I said this earlier, you're in the right spot. Don't move. Just settle in, feel the feels, absorb it all in, and then walk away, not only telling the person that you were with how great it was, but then reflecting on it later to distill it down to what ingredients baked that cake today. Because I need to stock those ingredients in my house all the time. And that is, that's exactly what happened. I forgot people were watching us until you said it. I've probably been frowning and looking like a fool. But again,
but to Mark Manson's point,
who gives a fuck? 100%. Who gives a fuck?
Yeah. You touched on a couple amazing points, and I'm gonna shoot at you some questions so you will make it to your tomorrow's flight and we will not spend the night here.
All right.
You mentioned earlier about the value of community and how important this is to kind of work with people, and we touched on being selective or particular or thoughtful in surrounding yourself with the right people, the value of 5 people that your closest circle is about. How would you go about helping a person from that community to feel that they belong more?
I would say, first of all, the onus is not on other people to make you feel like you fit. That is like trying to put a square peg into a round hole. You have to, sometimes through not great experiences, and that is those energy sucking experiences like big networking rooms or finding yourself with a group of people that don't fill your cup. In fact, they drink from it even when it's empty, and expect it to be refilled. Those are not the spaces you need to find yourself. But what I will promise people is that when you figure out what those experiences are and who those experiences are with, they multiply themselves sort of organically. So don't put the onus on other people. So you asked me the question, what can I do to help people, it is your own unique journey. And the most important thing is that you feel good about how you're showing up in the world. And that world literally starts with the person in the mirror. It is you, yourself, and no one else. And you'll find that when you start to live with that sort of conviction, and there's a difference, it's a conviction in who you are. It's not cockiness. It's I would not even say it's confidence, because there's sometimes an arrogance attached to confidence. It's just conviction. Conviction is what we believe. It's who we really know we are at our core, and having the fortunate circumstance through where we find ourselves to let that run wild is, if you haven't found that space before, actively looking for it, you'll find it, and you will know, just like in the time it takes you to snap your fingers, that you're exactly where you're supposed to be.
sounds like you feel it's really related to trusting your own gut and intuition.
Oh God, if I listen, that is where I think it gets hokey pokey for a lot of people with the whole like gut and intuition. I can tell you that I've relied on that so much in my life, and rarely does it ever fail me. It's really, really rare that my gut is wrong.
It's usually opposite, right? When you don't listen to it, then your gut gonna be, I told you so.
And regret, yeah. And, you know, regret, I think, is just through the experience of being human, inevitable.
Yeah.
Perfect, again, is that illusion we can strive for, but it's ridiculous. Stop wasting your time and energy. But in the process, you also start to appreciate that who you are is an evolution, but what propels that evolution is your community, who you are with. And the sad reality is evolution propels regardless, which means it can go in the wrong direction too.
So true.
Which is just more work, right? It's more work when you get to a point that of discomfort or a disconnect from that core of who you are with where you are, that you have to travel back up that road. You have to do the work to come out of there to then figure it out. And there's nothing to say that that journey is wrong. It's just the longer, harder journey.
It is.
And sometimes it's not a choice that we go down those paths. Sometimes it's circumstance in our worlds that cause us to or force us to go down that path.
Yeah.
It's why empathy is so important. And there's there's been a lot of talk in particular about empathy, largely because of people like Brene Brown, who I think is just a brilliant human and someone who really had the courage. Oddly enough, she speaks about courage, but to bring that into the vernacular, the common vernacular in the personal and professional development space, which is also just the space we live in. So you just could just call it life.
Yeah, bring it to life.
And empathy, to always take a deep breath and consider that someone has a very different lived experience than you. They have a very different circumstance than you. They have very different environmental influences than you. And that those may be the things, and likely are the things, that are steering them towards how they're showing up in the world, or maybe what dictates maybe their behavior. When we can do that, we find this sort of two things: courageous curiosity, to just to think about it that way, because that's a harder route to think than just judgment, because it takes more work. Judgment is easy. It's just like that path of least resistance. However, it also deploys the curiosity to have courageous conversations. And those conversations are really where you get to know somebody. And to me, that's sort of a winning equation for life. Again, hard to do, but not really hard to try and practice.
Trying doesn't hurt, right? So
trying is a step closer to doing than not at all. So try again. The old saying about practice makes perfect is absolute garbage. It doesn't make perfect. Practice, just begets more practice.
Yeah.
And inevitably you stay in a certain area where there's a level of comfort, and then hopefully you're pushed out of your comfort zone and you're practicing again, and you discover a whole new possibility. So that, I don't even remember what question you asked me at the beginning of that. Now we're in those deep trenches of thought, which
that's the whole plan, the master plan. Codi, what is your biggest problem?
Problem. I'm pausing not because I'm trying to think of one. I'm pausing because there are so many, and I'm trying to think of the one to share. For me, control is a big. I would say and a lot of that's tied to ego. But control is something that I would prefer to try and have less of in my life. But again, the prescriptive piece of it having played such an integral role in a lot of my successes causes you to find this comfort that is just not, it's just not always necessary. And control, when you think of it, is like a grip. The tighter it gets, well, the less likely the thing is you're gripping is able to breathe. And I've experienced that many times in my life, where control has dominated the conversation, if you will, or the circumstance, the experience. And it hasn't been great. And the grand summary of that is, again, tied to ego. So it's the biggest problem I think I have, and I know a lot of other people do, is just wrestling with that inner voice. And sometimes it's ego, sometimes it's the imposter, syndrome, which plays for a lot of us in our lives. Yeah. And that imposter syndrome is built largely by other people's expectations. It's remembering that at one point in my life, I highly valued giving very few fucks, and trying to make sure that I continue to do that. And Mark Manson really wrote it beautifully. It's an incredible book. For anyone who hasn't read it, go, don't walk, run to buy it, because it's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
But really, the message or the theory is, it's not about giving no fucks. It's about giving fucks where fucks are meant to be given.
Yeah.
And that sort of distills down the whole premise of how you're showing up in the world. When you are precious about your time, your energy, and the same for those around you, you find yourself in a community of people that only want to foster that for one another more and more and more. It doesn't mean that your quote unquote circle of five is always going to be perfect. It might require an audit every so often. Yeah. But those are the pieces of the puzzle. I write about them in the book. Those are some of the pieces of the puzzle that go into it, enabling our ability to think about something that is often thought about once we're gone, once we're dead, our legacy. Yeah. It's odd to me that we are programmed to believe it is something that is just there after us, when the truth is, every single day how we show up is determining the legacy that will be left. So instead of thinking it on a macro level, pulling it down to that micro level, all these things, community, energy expense, circle of five, all of these things, how we speak to ourselves, they all enable us to think about legacy differently maybe than we ever have before.
So true. I've got 2 ones that can transform to 3. We'll see.
Okay, shoot. We've got time.
Those ones are to, okay, if we have time. No.
How deep are we going?
They are short questions with probably short answers, but you can go deep.
There is never a short answer with me. I think you've figured that out. I'm a speaker and I talk in stories, so the likelihood of a short answer is very, very minuscule.
What is the question that you like to be asked more often?
Actually, how are you? Yeah. Most people, including myself, don't have the fortitude, the courage, the resilience to answer that question truthfully.
So what would be, to touch on that, what would be a underlining for you to stop and think about that question instead of using your, I would say probably it's already ingrained in us so hardly with that primal brain of like, how are you? I'm good, fine, how are you? Instead of doing that, what in that question and how that question should be asked, so you stop and think about it.
I don't think the question has to change. I think the question, how are you, is kind of an inevitability at this point in our civilization. It's something that it's almost on autopilot. It's the thing we are all programmed to say after hi. I think when we have the courage to answer it truthfully, or find the thing that no matter what still exists in the good and the bad. So for me, when someone says, how are you? And I say, I'm grateful, how are you? It doesn't matter whether I'm having good times or bad times, crazy or quiet, hectic or simple, tough or easy. That ingredient of gratitude, it's there no matter what. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what else is happening, because if that is at the core of who I am, if I am in perpetual gratitude, it steers me through whatever storm I'm in. And storms can be good and bad.
Yeah.
You know, a storm of success or of an achievement or a victory, and the storm of, quite the counter to that, the not so good stuff. So the question to me is not how can we change or articulate how are you, because I think frankly it's inevitable. It's how we respond to it. It's figuring out how to respond to it in a way that is honest and also provokes more curiosity or more interest if there needs to be that. And you'll find that when you do that, that's when those finger snap people come into your life, because the people that have the courage to care, because that also takes courage on that side.
Of course.
Those are likely people that you should have a deeper conversation with.
I'm leaning towards borrowing that from you.
Steal it. Steal it.
It's amazing. It's so simple, but also so valuable as well.
And it catches people off guard. I'm grateful. How are you? And it's wild how many people will say, well, sorry, what did you say? Or, sorry, did you say grateful? I say, absolutely. There's so much to be grateful for. I have a great partner, a great house, I have a great family, I have great friends, I have a great life in general.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that it's not without its roller coasters. It doesn't mean that all of those things operate at 100 all the time. Again, I kind of think that would be boring, and I think that's a level of perfection that a lot of people like to convey to the outside world, but the reality is I think often not that. And I know for me it's not. Sometimes things are good and sometimes things aren't good. Having that conversation also requires a depth of vulnerability and is not always an easy conversation to have. But when, at least in my experience, I've been able to do that, when I've been able to strike that curiosity with someone, the conversation either evolves to a depth very quickly that I appreciate and want to know more about that person and their existence and reality and contributions to the world and their world, or it's passive, just like the question, how are you, was in the first place.
Yeah. And
that's okay too. Not everybody needs to operate on the same plane of existence. It'd be a pretty boring world again. But that sort of cultivation of those five people, and five people, frankly, can be 20 as long as they're all, they all have those ingredients that bake that invariable cake that we talked about.
To put a bracket on this amazing and deep conversation, I will ask you two last questions. One being, what would you advise the young mavericks, the struggling ones, the ones feeling alone without support? What should they do to find their own tribe?
The advice I would give to a young maverick who is having the experiences you just said, trying to figure out who they are in this weird, crazy world that we live in, and how they can contribute, and who they will associate with, and all of those things. The most important piece of advice I could give them is just never relent in the pursuit of who you are. And then having the courage to be that person in the world.
Yeah.
Even if you're a weirdo. Because I'm a weirdo. I've been a weirdo my whole life. I love other weirdos. The weirdos are my community. And, everybody has a level of dysfunction. Every single one of us. And the more we can look at that with a bit of a smile and a bit of a levity, but also at the same time remain true to who we are and be honest about that with people, the more you'll find you'll attract exactly who you need in your circle.
That's true.
So young mavericks, relentless in the pursuit of who you are, and then the courage to be that person in the world. As long as it's a good person. I'll say that. As long as it's a good person, just be relentless.
Beautiful. Cody, what has been the greatest day of your life?
Oh, good grief.
What grief? Is it industry standard?
Yeah, right. Good. That's gosh, the best day of my life. I mean, I think I'd be a fool to not think that the day I was born, even though I don't remember it, is probably the best day of my life.
Amazing.
I mean, it was the first step in this incredibly wild journey of me. And had it not happened, the journey wouldn't exist. So it kind of has to be, I think, by default, the best day of my life, even though I don't really don't remember it for obvious reasons whatsoever. But yeah, that's my quick answer.
That's the best testament to you living with your legacy every day, and also it feels like this is the life of living with gratitude. If you think with gratitude about a moment that you have no control over, that you don't remember, and it's a blimp on the timeline of your life, that says it all.
100%. I couldn't agree more.
Cody, it was a pleasure. Thank you for being a part of this.
The pleasure was all mine. Thanks for the I don't think I got a piece of liver, but
Okay.
more importantly than the liver, for the conversation, for your friendship, for inviting me to be part of this, for taking such an interest in my message, my legacy. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And for everybody watching, go and buy Everyday Legacy. It is phenomenal. It's a really good, easy, and simple message that definitely can transform a lot of lives. Awesome. Thank you.
Matt. Thanks.
And it's a wrap. We dare you. If you are bold enough, hit subscribe, repost the rebellion, and don't miss out on next week's episode. It's going to be bloody brilliant. See you on the next one.